everybody. My name is George Williams, and I'm the Next Search Catalog Coordinator at Northeast Kansas Library System. And today I'm going to do a quick overview that we're calling What is an ILS? This is part of a series of videos for new staff working at Next Search Catalog Libraries. And we have many staff that are not only new to Next, but they're also new to libraries. So these overview videos are designed for staff that don't have a lot of library experience. Now, ILS is an acronym. It's short for Integrated Library System, but you might also hear it referred to by some other names. Some places it's called the Library Management System, or LMS. Sometimes you might hear it referred to as the Integrated Library Management System, or ILMS, which is not to be confused with the IMLS, which is another library acronym that's short for Institute of Museum and Library Services. But you might also hear it referred to as the catalog, the staff catalog, the system, the computer, or for us, you might hear it referred to as Next, or an Express, or Koha. So the quick 5-second definition of an ILS is right there on the screen. It's a computer system designed to put all of the programs that a library might use to conduct its business into one integrated piece of software. And ILSs generally include a cataloging module, the ability to search the catalog, a borrower's database, information about borrowers, circulation system, requests, so people can request things that aren't checked in, and an OPAC. OPAC is another abbreviation. It's short for Online Public Access Catalog. But then there's some other components. These are the most common components. Other components that we have that we don't use so much are serials for managing subscriptions, acquisitions. We use that a tiny little bit, but not much. Overdue notices. Everybody uses that, but I'm the only one that has the ability to modify those in Next Search Catalog. Course reserves and authority control. Those are generally the basic components you find in most ILSs. And currently, there are a whole lot of ILSs out there in the library world. So some names you might hear from time to time if in your library career include Alma, Apollo, Atrium, Carl, Destiny. Destiny is widely used at school libraries. Evergreen, Library Solutions is made by a company called TLC. Opals is widely used in church libraries. Polaris, Sierra, Circe Dynex, they have a product called Symphony that's extremely popular. Verso, you might hear a little bit about Verso in Kansas because Verso has a product called Share It that is what the state of Kansas used for its statewide interlibrary loan services. Now, WorldShare is used by WorldCat, but the one you might hear the most in Next Search Catalog is Koha, because Koha is the ILS used by Next Search Catalog. So we'll do a quick brief history of the ILS. The first major component of an ILS is the catalog, so let's start there. The first catalogs were simply the librarians. In 10 BC in Rome, if you wanted something out of the library, you would go find a librarian. That's just the way it worked. The libraries knew everything that was in the library, and so when you wanted to find something, you talked to them. There are some drawbacks to that, though. The bigger a library gets, the harder it is for people to know what's in it. If you've got multiple librarians, some of them are going to be good at remembering some things, some are going to be good about others. The librarian in a bigger library doesn't necessarily get to read all the books. Even back 2,000 years ago, some of the libraries were starting to get pretty big. And the worst drawback of all is that if the librarian dies, all of that catalog knowledge goes with them. So it's pretty common for librarians to have a good idea of what's in their library. But they started keeping lists quite a long time ago. The slide you see up on the screen there now, this is a library catalog. This is actually part of a catalog from Tormia on the east coast of Sicily. These tablets were discovered during a construction project in 1969, and it's a list of things that were in the library in Tormia. And keeping a list, keeping a physical copy of a list of what was in the library, that was pretty common, and it lasted a long time. That's what catalogs were. Here's actually, on this slide, is a picture of a page from the Toledo Public Library catalog from about 1880. So the disadvantage of a big book of lists is that what do you do when material gets added or removed? Somebody has to go in and edit the list. And if you've got a printed book, adding things is complex, it's hard to search. It's not a perfect system. There's a lot of disadvantages. But this kind of got libraries along all the way, for quite a long time. What really changes in libraries, though, is the Renaissance and the invention of the printing press. When Gutenberg invents the printing press, publishing in Europe goes from a few hundred books a year to thousands of books a year. And by the time we get up to the modern period, when we get to the 1700s and 1800s, there are tens of thousands of books being printed every year, and libraries can't keep their paper catalogs up to date. There was a revolution in printing and publishing, and so the library catalog needed a revolution too. And guess what? That came along during the French Revolution. Cards for the catalog, that was a French idea, that was a French concept. The old government was out, they were beheaded, and the new government was in. And one of the things that the new government did was that they seized property from the church and from a lot of rich people, especially the rich people that were being executed. So in 1794, I believe it is, the French government seizes all of the property of the Catholic Church, including the libraries. So this is the library, this is the monastery at Mont Saint Michel, and like all the other French libraries, their property was seized, and all of the books were seized. And after a few missteps of what to do with that property, I won't talk about what the French originally planned to do, they came up with the idea of let's create a system of public libraries throughout the country. And all the books that they had seized from the people they'd executed, all the books they had seized from the church, that was the basis for their new public library system. So librarians had to come up with a way that there was an explosion of libraries, so there's an explosion of new library staff. They have to find a way to come up with protocols for how to catalog these books, and cataloging procedures that could be easily understood by new people to the library world, and that could be repeated throughout any library in France, and a way to keep a catalog up to date with this huge influx of stuff. It was chaos. There are people, there are books coming in from estates where people have been had their property seized. There's books coming in from the churches. There's books coming in from monasteries. It was chaos. And so somebody came up with this crazy idea, at least it sounds crazy to us. They said, why don't we write the information about these books on the backs of playing cards? The reason it sounds crazy to us is because the backs of modern playing cards have a design on them. They have pictures on them. They have stuff on them. But in the 1790s in France, the backs of the playing cards were blank. And cards are kind of the perfect medium for a physical library catalog, because cards can be sorted, resorted, shuffled around. You can add things to the card catalog. You can take things out. It's really easy, and the cards are durable. And so this starts in France in the 1790s, and by the 1900s, most of the major libraries in the Western world had adopted the card catalog as their method for cataloging materials. So I don't want everybody to think that the catalog is the only part of the ILS, because The borrower data is important too. So let's switch gears here and talk about lending. And so that's one of the issues is for most of the history of libraries, books stayed in the library, except for special circumstances. When you think about it, ancient books and medieval books are a pretty rare commodity. They're printed on vellum or papyrus. It was not easy to manufacture paper. And so most of the libraries that had materials, that had books, they didn't get loaned out. And when they did on those rare occasions where people borrowed things, the librarians knew who the people were that were borrowing the books. And in the Middle Ages, lending becomes more common because medieval libraries lent collections of books. They lent groups of books to other libraries so that another library could come and say, we'd like copies of these 5 things. And so the library would lend those 5 things to another library so they could take them back and copy them, and then they would give the originals back. And when they did this, they actually drew up contracts that say, this is what we're loaning you, this is when you need to get them back by, and if you never return them, this is what we're going to charge you for not returning those. And so library fines were really, dealt with in terms of a barter system. If you don't return these 5 books, you owe us 4 cows and 2 pigs, and maybe a couple of gold pieces. Books were rare commodities. By the 1900s, there were really 2 types of libraries in the United States of America. There were reading rooms, where you would just go in and read the books in the library. And then there were lending libraries. They were pretty common by the beginning of the 20th century. And even most lending libraries also had reading rooms. And so libraries, when lending became more common, they used to track who had the different materials in ledgers. This slide is a page of the New York Public Library's ledger. There's Herman Melville in the bottom half of the page. This is a list of the 3 books that he checked out in April of 1850. So it was a pretty rudimentary system, just a big book full of names and what they've borrowed. So to get back to card catalogs, by the 1900s, the Library of Congress had adopted the card catalog as its means for maintaining a catalog of what was in its collections. And there's a slide of the card catalog department at the Library of Congress around the turn of the century. The Library of Congress had another service too. This is a picture from the catalog distribution service operated by the Library of Congress. You could subscribe to cards, catalog cards from the Library of Congress. You would, at your library, you would buy books like in January and February and March. And at the end of March, you would send a list of what you'd purchased off to the Library of Congress, and they would print off the cards to go with those books. And then they would mail them off to you. And that way you didn't have to, librarians at public libraries didn't have to catalog their own materials. They could just buy the cataloging, essentially. And what it did for the United States is it made card catalogs very consistent because the cards were all produced by this centralized organization. It was a pretty common practice. Membership cards, or what we now call library cards, they came into use widely in the late 1800s and early 1900s when libraries stopped being reading rooms and became lending libraries. This card that you see in the slide here, the kind of orangish card there with the metal plate in it, that's was an invention by the Gaylord brothers. They invented the metal stamp card in, I believe it was 1932. And these cards were enormously popular and widely used throughout the United States of America all the way up until the 1980s. I actually had a metal stamp library card. It was the first library card I got in 1975 at Idaho Falls Public Library. But unlike a ledger, what a library card means is that the borrower information has to be kept separate from the circulation information, because all you're doing is stamping a card number into the book, the card pocket from the book. And so you need to have paper stored somewhere else that has the borrower information that goes with that card number in it. So I grew up in Idaho Falls, which at the time was a town of about 30 to 35,000, and about 10,000 people had library cards. So that meant that somewhere in the Idaho Falls Public Library, they were maintaining 10,000 pieces of paper that had contact information for their library card holders on it. A lot of paper, a lot of storage, and not, by our standards today, not the most efficient way of storing data. And that becomes the issue. By the 1960s, libraries were running out of space for card catalogs. When I started at the University of Idaho in 1985, the card catalog at the University of Idaho took up approximately 700 square feet on the first floor of the library. As a reference point, the first house that I lived in, the first house that I rented with two roommates, and I was only 510 square feet. So the card catalog at the University of Idaho Library was bigger than the house that I lived in when I was attending school at the University of Idaho. So in the 60s, because they were running out of space, the Library of Congress began the MARC pilot project. And this project was designed to create a format for putting bibliographic data into a computer. Even earlier than that, though, some libraries had started experimenting with storing borrower data on IBM punch cards. But even the punch cards required space for physical storage. And by the 1960s and 1970s, libraries were looking for more advanced technology for data storage for borrower information. Punch cards are almost as space-consuming as paper membership forms. And with the advent of magnetic data, it was thought that there could be an easier way to store borrower information. So I don't know the exact moment that this came into being, but Henriette Avram was the lead designer of the MARC format that we still use for bibliographic data. But I have no idea who first came up with the idea for storing borrower data. But from the sake of my imagination, I'm just going to say for a minute that it was some guy named Bob. And in my imagination, the way we get to the first integrated library system is that Bob and Henriette meet on an elevator in the Library of Congress one day. And Bob asks Henriette what she's working on, and she says, "I'm working on a way to put bibliographic data on a computer." And then Bob says, "Hey, I've been working on a way to put membership data on a computer." And then I think they both probably turned to each other and they said, "Hey, what if we integrate the two and put them on the same computer?" And thus comes the ILS, the idea that we can use one computer to store all of this data. And the great thing about putting the bibliographic data and the item data and the borrower data all on the same computer is you can then use that system to track circulation and do inventory control. So other components get added over time. Somebody in the serials department said, "Hey, could we use that to track subscription information?" Somebody else said, "We can do authority control. We can, all of these subject headings are weird, so let's find a way to do authority control and we can have all the subject headings match." But Koha is the integrated library system that we use for Next Search Catalog. And it's got all of the components we need. It's got a cataloging component so we can track what are the titles, what are the items that the library owns. Once you've got that information into an ILS, you want to be able to search it. And there's an advanced search module for Koha. And we've got borrower data in the patrons module, And once we have those together, we have a circulation module that allows us to say these borrowers have borrowed these items. Beyond that, there is a serials module that currently none of the libraries in Next Search Catalog are using. A serials module is a way to help track magazine subscriptions and journal subscriptions and to see what issues have arrived, what the titles you own magazines for. It's a good way to store and manage subscriptions. There's an acquisitions module. We are using the acquisitions module for our patron suggestion system, which allows patrons to use the ILS to suggest purchases of things that are not already in the catalog. Notices come from the tools and administrative side of Koha. It's a system that is in place in Koha that currently only NECL staff really have a lot of control over. There's a course reserves module. This is a module that's usually used at academic libraries. So let's say you're in an academic library and there's a class that you're teaching and there are books in the library that you want to make easily available to the students in your class. You put them on reserve so that people can go to the circulation desk and say, you know, I need the books for English 257. Or, you know, it's an easy way for academic libraries to set aside materials and make them available only to people taking a specific class. And then there's authority control, which is a module designed to help make it so that all of the subject headings match. So every time somebody has a book in the catalog where the subject is cooking, that cooking is always spelled the same way, and it always, the subject headings are consistent. And so you don't have some books that have the subject of cookery and some of them that have cooking and some of them say meals. You know, you want the subjects to all match when the subjects are the same or similar. And authority control is something we will be adding to Koha for Next Search Catalog by the end of 2022. And then finally, there is the OPAC. And like I said, that is the online patron access catalog. And this is where borrowers can interact with their account. They can search the catalog, they can place requests, they can see what fines and fees they have. It's the way that the borrowers access our computer system. Now, beyond the ILS, our ILS can talk to other ILSs. It can talk to other systems. It can talk to other devices. And so our integrated library system can integrate with other systems. And that's mostly done through a protocol called Standard Interchange Protocol, or SIP. And that's what allows our integrated library system to talk to things like Hoopla or Canopy or Overdrive. And if you don't know what those are yet, there will probably be a video coming soon that will tell you more information about those. So let me recap everything. An ILS is a computer system designed to combine all of the programs a library might use to conduct its business into one integrated piece of software. So thanks for listening again. My name is George Williams, and I'm the Next Search Catalog Coordinator at Northeast Kansas Library System. If you have any questions, you can contact us at NECLS. Our contact information is up there on the screen. And if you have technical questions about Next Search Catalog, the best place to ask is to send an email to nexthelp@necls.org. Thanks a lot.